In the dead of night, it happened. Suddenly, a woman's scream pierced the silence, jolting us awake. This scream, blood-curdling and haunting, echoed through the entire house, making our hearts race. We rushed to the window, peering out into the eerie, moonlit night, but saw nothing. Shadows danced menacingly, but the source of the scream remained a mystery. That unsettling incident cast a sinister shadow over the rest of our stay. Back in the summer of 67, we were visiting my grandparents along with other family members who had traveled from Louisiana. Uncle Eddie and Aunt Rosemary arrived with 6 of their 12 kids for an overnight visit. We were there for a weekend getaway too. Of the 6 cousins, only 2 were around my age. Eddie Jr. was just a year younger, and the eldest, Rosemary, was my age, 12. We loved taking long walks along the beautiful country roads. My grandparents lived in a pretty rural area with lots of farms and plenty of space between houses. The nearest neighbor? Half a mile away. That meant families had plenty of privacy. It was really nice out there.
We had our eyes set on a particular ice cream parlor called Twin Kiss and wanted to enjoy the walk to get there. Our parents gave us some money, a quarter each. Can you believe it? Just a dime or a quarter for a decent-sized ice cream cone back then. It's true. Off we went on our much-anticipated journey. It was a bit of a hike along a long paved road just outside of Elwood City, Pennsylvania, but the road was usually clear of traffic. We'd pet the horses or cows grazing along the fences as we walked. As we walked, something weird caught our attention. Shadows moved on their own, dancing across the fields in odd patterns. Eddie Jr. suddenly pointed, swearing he saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line, watching us. We all turned to look, but the figure had vanished. There was an old abandoned mansion set back a couple of 100 yards from the road. It sat right across from a dairy farm. Local kids always told us that mansion was haunted. Naturally, this made us curious. That curiosity almost got us into big trouble. Let me explain.
We were on our way back from the ice cream parlor, having devoured our cones, when we approached the mansion. I imagine that, in its prime, it was quite a sight. Picture a smaller version of Tara from Gone with the Wind. It was solid white, 4 stories tall, with a cellar and a veranda-like porch wrapping around it. The main entrance was right in the middle of the porch. Very charming. But now, the porch looked ready to collapse if anyone dared to step on it. Not wanting to risk it, we found an old laundry tub, flipped it over, and stood on it to peer inside the first floor of the house. From what little we could glimpse, the place must have been splendid in its prime. We spotted old Victorian furniture with fancy upholstery and intricate carvings on the arms and legs. Other pieces, draped in sheets, were almost black from dust and grime. As dusk approached, the light outside began to fade. While gazing through the window, a loud noise suddenly echoed from above, maybe 1 or 2 floors up. It sounded like someone shoving or dragging chairs. Startled, we jumped off the wash tub and bolted away from the house. Then, for some reason, we all stopped and turned back, curious to see who or what it was. We just wanted to make sure nothing was chasing us. Honestly, it was pretty stupid. We should have kept running, but curiosity got the better of us. As we turned back, a cold wind suddenly swept through despite the warm summer evening. It felt like the mansion itself was exhaling, trying to push us away. We shivered, goosebumps rising on our arms.
While we stood there, we noticed a bright light moving on the 3rd floor. It looked like someone carrying a lantern, but there was no one holding it. Just the light, bobbing through the many broken windows. We were still staring when a farmer snuck up behind us with a shotgun. He wasn't going to shoot us, of course. Just scare us. And scare us he did. He yelled, saying his family owned the mansion and we were trespassing. We apologized, really humbly, and told him someone else was trespassing upstairs. We described the moving lantern on the upper floor. He got annoyed, insisting we were imagining things. According to him, the last family member died in there over 50 years ago, and it's been empty ever since. No electricity either. My cousins and I protested. We were too old to be imagining things, right? An 11-year-old and two 12-year-olds all saw it. We must have watched that light for a good 5 minutes before he arrived. He lowered his gun, which was a huge relief for us. Then, sternly, he said it was time for some clarification. He went ahead and asked us to follow. Amazingly, he walked right onto the front porch. Given his size, we couldn't believe he trusted it not to collapse, but he did. He assured us it was safe to come up and take a look inside, so we gingerly mounted the wooden steps and peeked in at his urging. What we saw floored us. Sure, there was a grand staircase with a fancy banister going up, but the floors were gone, completely rotted away. No one could walk up there because there were no floors to walk on, and the stairs, they were partially rotted too.
As we peered inside, a sudden, loud bang echoed through the house like a door slamming shut with incredible force. We jumped back, almost falling off the porch. The farmer's face went pale, though he tried to stay calm, insisting it was just the wind. We all went pale too. He asked if we were satisfied. We nodded, apologized, and he escorted us out. He told us to go home and not to trespass again, even apologizing for scaring us with the gun. But the gun was the last thing on our minds as we trekked back to Grandma and Grandpa's. We discussed it excitedly, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Later that night, sitting in the living room, we heard a faint sound of a piano playing. My grandparents didn't have a piano, but the music was unmistakable. A haunting, melancholic melody that seemed to seep through the walls. We sat in terrified silence until it finally stopped. Just when we thought it couldn't get any stranger, it did. In the early hours of the morning, we were awoken again. This time by a series of heavy thuds coming from the attic. My grandparents didn't use the attic. It was mostly for storage and remained locked. Grandpa reluctantly got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and headed upstairs to check. He had barely touched the attic door when it flew open, and something heavy rolled down the stairs. It was an old, dusty trunk that had been securely locked for years. It burst open upon impact, spilling its contents. A collection of old family photos and a tattered diary. The photos showed a young woman, eerily resembling my grandmother, standing in front of the mansion we had visited earlier. The diary contained frantic entries about strange noises and ghostly apparitions at the mansion. We were stumped by what had happened. We all agreed to keep it a secret from our parents. After all, who would believe a bunch of kids? That was our logic at the time, so we secretly talked about it for the rest of the visit. What exactly had we witnessed? The property owners eventually put up an electric fence around the mansion, with their dairy cows grazing behind it. A big metal sign warned, "No trespassing." Even today, some of us are still scratching our heads over that strange incident.